All right. I told you we had another special guest this week. Without further ado, strategist, organizer, consultant, policy advocate, the girl who sat right next to me at all of the high school events because our last names are so close to each other. So I like to think that I really rubbed off on her. I have something to do with this. This is Bailey Perkins Wright. You got to say the whole thing like a Tribe Called Quest. I saw the post. I know. How are you, Bailey?
I am good, Dre. It is exciting to get a chance to talk with you on your podcast. And I don't know if the listeners know this or not, but you were one of the smartest folks that I went to school with. So, I mean, it
Oh.
was just always cool to be around you. And now it's cool, what, full circle 12 years later, we're
Yeah, it's been a
talking about
while.
life together. So it's a cool thing.
Oh, thank you for the props. They say men don't know how to take compliments, so I'll try and just say thank you. I appreciate it. Um, yeah. Well, I invited you on here because I think you're interesting. That's why I invite people on the podcast more than anything because I think that you've done things that a lot of people haven't done, and that things that some people might not know. It's not I think a lot of times people don't understand that there's people around you and they may not be like actually famous or anything like that, but they've actually done things that have given them a life experience that's valuable for other people to kind of hear how they went on through that. So we talked about kind of like being in high school and middle school together and all those things. So we grew up in the same town, uh, Lawton, Oklahoma. For those of you who don't know, um, what was that like, kind of for you? I mean, everybody who listens to the podcast kind of knows what that was like for me. But what was kind of like your early life in Lawton? What was that like?
So, Lawton shaped me in so many different ways and prepared me for things to, be mindful in life, right? Um, I remember having, for instance, like Mr. Kakinka's um, history class.
Yeah,
And I mean, and that class really built my interest on um, going into politics, but even tying the historical context to it, right? One of the things that he used to always say in class was, the government's role or responsibility that people want them to do is to serve, protect, and leave alone, right? And
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
lens that I've always thought about, especially the work that I do now. And so, growing up at Eisenhower, I was really involved in all the things from sports to different clubs and even just programs outside of the state that I was sent to do, like Youth Leadership Oklahoma, to where I have friends from you know other parts of the states when I was a junior in high school that I'm still friends with today, right? So there's just so much that I owe to Lawton. And I feel like growing up in a military town, we got to know so many different people from
Definitely,
so many different walks of life, especially Eisenhower, right?
we really
Um,
did.
because even like in the time that we went, the way the lines were drawn, I mean, we had kids who, English may not have been their first language. We had kids
Yeah,
who, you know, literally from all over the country who have been to places around the world, kids who were fluent and kids who may have worn the same shoes,
yeah,
all semester, right? And
hmm,
so
yeah.
having those
Literally,
different, yeah, yeah, and having those different experiences um, with friendships, with worldviews, is something that also I feel like helped me prepare for um, expanding my mind and perspectives about the things that people experience in this life. So, um, I always say that good things come from Lawton, and I feel
there
like
you
you
go.
and I are reflections of that.
Yeah.
And I'm always finding different ways to connect the lens that I gained from my upbringing in Lawton to the work that I do, or even just like seeing people often, that either have ties to Lawton that I may have gone to school with or whatever. There's a whole lot of us in the Oklahoma City metro, or
Yeah.
I lived in DC for a little bit, met people who had ties to Lawton or had been to Lawton due to military or family or
Oh
whatever the
yeah,
case
you
may
meet
be.
people
And
who know about
so,
Fort Sill. You meet a lot of
yes,
people when you tell them you from a military town. Because a lot of times when you from Lawton, you don't tell people where you from. They're like, "Where are
right.
you from?" You like, "I'm from Oklahoma." They be like, "Where in Oklahoma?" You be like, "It's like an hour south from Oklahoma City." Like, I'm gonna tell you, Lawton. It's not gonna. I can tell you I'm from Lawton. They ain't gonna tell you nothing. Like, I'm not ashamed. It's just not really a value to you if you're not from the area. But when you tell me you're from a military base and they got some military family, a lot of times they'll uh they'll know Fort Sill.
Oh, for sure, for
Um,
sure. And I think that's just something that I'm grateful to. And even just some of our local experiences growing up. We had so many memories because there wasn't a whole lot, even, back when we
True.
were young for youth. So we had to create things for ourselves and do things that were fun. So never
Yeah,
forget, from the house parties we would go to
man.
hanging out at what we call the old Walmart versus the new Walmart. And, you know, and I'm pretty sure that's still language today, right? That only
Yeah,
people
man. We
from
said I know
Lawton
we.
would
They like y'all
understand.
country. Y'all
So,
got two Walmart. Got differentiators between the Walmarts. Like, listen. We got what we got.
no,
Uh,
remember when we thought we were big stuff when we got Olive Garden, right? Like, and that was what, our senior year?
we was a place now. We like, oh, people come. We got an Olive
Right.
Garden.
You can't tell me nothing. We got a Starbucks in my community. Like,
Listen, and we had two, and we
so,
couldn't even hold up two Starbucks. Man, like this.
yeah, right,
Um,
right. But
One thing you
good
said
memories from Lawton.
earlier, yeah, right. One thing you said early on that kind of like stands out to me, and you mentioned it really coming right on, and I think it's worth mentioning because I think a lot of times people don't. There's a lot of, how can I put this? There's a lot of narratives that people are really comfortable with, and they understand those archetypes a little bit better. Like people who go through
Right.
school and they not that smart, so they kind of struggle through school, or maybe they have like bad home lives, so like they have all these other things or whatever. And I think due to that, there's kind of a segment where you don't really have a lot of modeling. And I feel like personally, I kind of fall into that because, like you said, I am really smart. And I
You
actually
were the person
prefer.
in school who didn't have to try. You wouldn't study. We'd take
Mm-mm.
the same test, even though I studied for hours, and somehow you get a higher grade than me. And I would never understand, right? But that's just because of the way your mind works. You've always been brilliant.
But so the thing is that the world doesn't actually reward that in the way that
Right.
you would think it does. The world
Sure.
actually rewards discipline.
Yeah, that's true.
And because of that, I grew up with all of the. I was walking in, taking even up until there's a story I've told this on the podcast before, but my senior year, they called me to the office almost at the end of it because I had only been to like 23 full days of school the second semester of senior year, like between skipping this class or that class or going whatever. And my first hour was Mr. Bear's AP economics class.
Mm,
So I go to his class, and his class was one of the ones I was skipping the most because it's first hour. I mean, I'm not.
it's early.
It's early. It's early, Bailey. Just to keep it real, it's early. So I'm skipping this class, and I show up one day on Fridays because on Fridays he had cookies. So
Mm,
I came for the cookies on Friday, and he's passing out this AP practice test that day. So I took it because I was there that day, and I passed it. And it was like the weirdest feeling because he was just like, why are you like this almost? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
I'm gonna say for what it is, like, as an old white man watching me sit up there and piss away all this potential, like, I just feel like that just burned him up. Like, he just couldn't understand, like,
Yeah.
how are you both of these things? And they called all my teachers and my mom and all that to the school and all this other stuff or whatever. But I never got the messaging that how smart you are isn't gonna be enough. I had to figure that out grown. I had to get grown and
Yeah.
figure out that it's being the smartest person
Because
doesn't
Dre,
always.
the reality is because for some of our white peers, being smart enough or having the minimum can be fine to get you what you need, right?
That's true.
For us, the knowledge and the skill is foundational. Like there's other stuff we have to have on top of that in order to prove that we have the capability to do different things. And so you're
100%.
absolutely right that like passing those rigorous AP exams was just not enough for Black kids, right?
Nah, I mean, and when you get grown, it's like there's so many instances where what's in between you and what you want, you actually won't even really get to demonstrate what you can do.
Sure.
It will be more built on, even in my opinion, the idea that you need a degree to do a lot of things is not really about the information that you learn there, because whatever career you're going to do, they're going to have to teach you everything once you get there anyway. It's more about proving that you can sit down and learn something. Like, do
Well,
you
and
have,
developing a global citizen and a broad range of knowledge about a lot of things to give you problem solving skills, not
yeah,
a specific
yeah,
skill to do a specific job. You're
yeah.
right.
It's
That's
like,
not the job of college.
nah, yeah. It's like, do you have like you said, do you have these other skills? Can you do? It's more about showing that you have that discipline. That's why
The discipline, yeah,
now
absolutely.
that I'm older, one thing that I never let my kid do that I did, because Bree is smart. I
That's your
don't let her
child.
do
That's your child.
the not doing of the extra things, the absence of
Sure.
extracurriculars. Like
Yeah.
that is foundationally important to me. And the only
Because it's
reason
like you
why,
said, it's the discipline that you get from it. It's the camaraderie and those soft skills and those other things that you get that wrap around to an experience. To your point, that being smart enough just doesn't get you.
it doesn't get you all of
So
that. It doesn't. But okay, so high school, Lawton, we learn all this stuff. We mad disciplined in high school. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
It's, as much as you were talking about how smart I was, you were definitely, absolutely one of the top students at
Well, and I
Eisenhower.
may have been, okay, in my smarts, but like I feel you on, I a lot of people don't know this, but I was in the same boat as you. I may not have missed as many days of school, but my parents received that call senior year saying Bailey missed 2 days of school and she's not going to graduate, even though I had a weighted, not unweighted, but a weighted GPA of 3.8. I was in all of these clubs, but all of the things that I was pushing myself to do was taking me away from that requirement of the days of being in school. And so my dad had to
Oh
have a
yeah.
conversation with the principal and all of that. Like, no, my child's gonna graduate.
Yeah, yeah,
She's
yeah.
gonna
Because she's
graduate on
not at
time.
school, but she's at school stuff. You know what I'm saying? This is school
Yeah, yeah.
adjacent when she's not here. So you
I
left.
feel you on them.
So we graduate. You go to college.
Yeah, we did.
Where'd you go to college? How was college? Talk to us about.
So the interesting experience about being from Lawton, right? Every Lawtonian youth experiences the mindset of I want to do what I got to do to get out of Lawton, right?
Yep.
Because many of us didn't feel like we could reach our full potential in Lawton or didn't have the things that we desired.
Yeah.
And I felt that way about Oklahoma as a whole because I was like, I'm getting out of here. I thought
Understandably
I was going
so.
to be Bailey the Baylor Bear. I just had it set in my head. And thankfully, I'm blessed because I had an older sister who was able to forge a trail for me, who was able to hit those bumps in the road, to see that hindsight, to tell me these are the things you're going to do, right?
Yeah.
Because even like thinking about not being smart is not enough because like our high school counselor only told me to take the ACT our senior year. I took it twice, and I'm not a test taking is not my thing, right?
Yeah. And
I'm
that's a thing. That
great at
is a thing.
studying and all of that. I get nervous with test taking, right? And so my ACT was not that great at
Yeah.
all. It was enough to get me into the schools that I wanted to go to. It
Yeah.
wasn't enough to get me the scholarship money that I needed because
Yeah.
my parents were far from affluent, right?
Yeah.
And so my sister said, Bailey, you're going to stop being silly and you're going to apply for this Claire Looper scholarship. And I was like, I guess at Oklahoma City University.
Yeah.
And so I applied and was accepted. And at that time, the Looper Scholarship covered room and board, it covered
Ooh.
tuition, it covered fees, and then it also covered our meal plan. So I mean, it was a full ride scholarship,
Yeah,
and
that's
I'll
that's
never
everything.
forget everything.
That's
And I'm just
everything.
really blessed because I wouldn't have applied and I wouldn't have done that if my sister didn't say, get it together, you're going to this school. Because I had this mindset of, I'm just getting out of Oklahoma, but it was really the best experience for
That's what
me,
we
right?
all want to do, coming from being from somewhere like Oklahoma, and I feel like a
Yeah,
lot of that is being black in Oklahoma. You don't want to be here. It's
right.
a weird place to grow up. I do, and we'll kind of get into this a little bit more. I do think that it actually gives us a much softer gaze on white people than people think it does. Like, I think that people would think growing up black in Oklahoma would make you kind of like have like a sourness towards white people, but it's actually not that. It's like I grew up around white people. I understand. You know what I'm saying? Even when Trump gets elected president, I feel. Side note: were you surprised when Trump won?
Because of the shifts in the country, no.
I,
Someone framed it into this way, and this has stuck with me since then. Anytime there is progress, particularly in the Black community, there's always backlash in some type of form,
always.
right? So, when integration happened, what happened? Black teachers lost their jobs, Black students were put into white spaces, and that has created inequity since in different ways, right? When we had the first Black president of the United States elected as president, what happened, right? We elected someone who, and we as in this country,
Yeah,
elected someone who was speaking to whiteness and white values, right?
one
Because
hundred
white people
percent.
felt like they were being left behind in different ways. And so he was speaking to a different identity. And so that doesn't surprise me at all that there was this shift of looking for someone who wasn't a part of the political fray, who was willing to quote unquote speak his mind, who was a political outsider. And then even the events from January 6th, when there's a moment to talk about that, I'll talk about why that affected me personally,
Personally,
right?
yeah, we will absolutely circle
Yeah.
back to that. The I feel like the people who were surprised didn't grow up in places like where we grew up because they don't know the people who will they don't know the white youth minister who's proud of all the black kids who come to his services who will absolutely go vote for Donald Trump.
Right.
You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like they don't know that guy, but it's like I
Right.
do. Like I know several of those guys. You know what I'm saying? Like I
Right.
know lots of people who are in spaces where it's like they walk on this ground where like I don't I don't really agree with this, but I will still do whatever anyway. Like I just think that we kind of have a better understanding of that than other people. But the whole point really was about how it also gives us a kind of want to escape because
Mhm.
what we don't really get is big spaces beyond church. We don't really
Right.
have any big spaces of blackness where it's like these are our spaces where we do, you know what I'm saying, anything, where we have anything like that. It's not a lot of that here.
Right.
I think that kind of drives us to want to go a little bit. But you
Well, and I mean, and when you think about it, like the history of Oklahoma, right? We were at one point intended to be a Black state, right? There was pushes of that from ancestors, right?
yeah.
To where we have more all Black towns historically than any other place in the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had Black Wall Street in Tulsa, where the dollar would touch 11 times in that community before going outside. That
And
community
that's
was self sufficient.
crazy.
You had people thriving. And then what happened? It was literally burnt to the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Literally 101 years ago, right? To where there are people living today who were affected by that massacre, right? Because sometimes we look at things as so distant, but the reality is,
No.
is all of those things still interplay into
Yeah.
why there's been so much disparity and destruction, right? I mean, our governments actively participated in destroying Greenwood, and they received no compensation for it. their insurance requests were denied, right? When you look at redlining and different things, Norman was a sundown town, right? There's just the first law in Oklahoma's books. And if you go into the state capitol, they have a beautiful museum about the construction of the Capitol building and some of the history of our state. There's a document in there in the museum that shows like the first law in the books in Oklahoma was segregation, right? That's telling about where the
I did not
priorities
know
are
that.
of the state, right? And some of those things, you know, perpetuate. So, because the thing is like when you implement policy, just because you change something doesn't mean it magically goes away. Sometimes there are structures in place
A lot of
that
times.
reinforce themselves. And that's what we see for the disparities that Black and Brown people face in our state. So, to your point, Dre, it does feel like there weren't things here for us because they were literally destroyed.
Lit-
So literally burnt to the ground.
like it doesn't feel that way. It is that way
It is.
because yeah, I mean, and that's
Because I
it's
mean, on my father's side, I'm fifth generation Oklahoman, right?
yeah.
Um, we were able, through some distant family, able to track my family lineage to where my great times five grandmother was brought here on a slave ship and enslaved in Virginia. And then she had a daughter, and then they were taken from Virginia to Georgia, and then from Georgia to Texas because her daughter had a son, right? So my great times three grandfather was freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. And then he and his daughter, my great times two grandmother, came on a wagon train of families up to Oklahoma, right? To one of those historic all Black towns because
Yeah.
that was seen as the great opportunity for Black folks to achieve that American dream. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so our ancestors worked hard to try to create space and opportunities for us, but those racism tears stuff
Prevails
down
a
and,
lot of
and, and it
times.
continues to prevail.
Yeah, that it's crazy when you can put a specific example on it like that because I feel a lot of times when we say stuff like this or you try and explain little different things that happen that have impacted your family in different ways, it's it's frustrating to try and to explain to somebody who doesn't have any context of it, and a lot of that is why the stuff that you see going on with education bothers me so much because I already grew up in a place with all this history that I didn't know anything about until I was grown
It was not part of our Oklahoma history class.
at
What
all.
I
And
do
and
remember
and
from
to
my
hear,
Oklahoma
I know
history
what you were about to
class was,
say
mhm,
was what
because were we in that class together in ninth grade?
I don't. We weren't in it together, but we both had it. What do
With
you
Mr.
remember?
Miller, the first day he taught us how to tie a noose
I
on the
see.
first day of class. And I remember feeling so uncomfortable and telling my parents about it. And my dad had to march up to the school because I had the highest grade in that class and I had a C. Everybody else had like D's and F's because, and then he didn't teach us anything about
He didn't
the
teach us
Black history
shit.
of Oklahoma. We didn't learn about the all Black towns. We definitely didn't learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre, right?
Only black
And
people
so
I knew
that's
about
how
in Oklahoma
racism
was on that news.
perpetuates.
Let Mr. Miller tell it. The only black people in Oklahoma was on the end of that news.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It,
he
it
didn't
was a
teach
real
us shit.
experience. Yeah. We didn't learn anything about our identity and how we contribute. And mind you, I learned in my family history, my relative integrated Oklahoma State University. She was the first Black graduate, Nancy Randolph Davis, right? Like,
Gang, gang.
didn't learn anything about that in school
No.
though. Nothing. Nothing.
It's crazy
We didn't learn
the
anything about Clara
disconnect.
Looper. We didn't learn anything about Roscoe Dungeon. Did you know that Clara Looper held protests in Lawton to integrate Dodo Park? So
No,
in Lawton, Lawton had
I know about Dodo
a
Park though.
racially segregated pool that only white people could go to on Sheridan, I believe, because it's
Uh,
where those apartments are, where that Burger King. is
Or is it
now.
on is that, yeah, it is on Sheridan. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Dodo Park was on Sheridan. Or off Sheridan.
And it's wild because one day I was reading in the Lawton Grapevine because I keep in touch with it and
For
read in
sure.
there because even when it's crazy. But there were people even writing in there because there were people who are adults now who were children at Dodo Park who had no idea that there were kids who were barred from going there, right? All they knew is, oh, I'm going to a park and I remember playing in it, what it looked like. They had no idea the racial trauma that that park was causing, right?
And how
And
deep
so
that was,
after,
because that man closed it down when he said he had to let niggas in it. He was
exactly,
like, it's
that's exactly
cool.
what happened.
I don't even need the money.
And he
I'll,
closed it.
I'll rather go broke.
And
That's
today there's an
crazy.
apartment complex on it. And so,
It's
I mean, there's just
crazy
so
how
much
deep that
history.
runs. It's
Mm-hmm.
crazy how deep that would even run in you for you to say. And this is one of the things I think is crazy because I always have said that I feel like one of the biggest fears that white people have about black people wanting all of this equity and equality is that if the tables were turned, we would do the same thing. But it's like, no, we wouldn't. Like, I can't even imagine a black man owning a park and being like, I'm not gonna let nobody in here who got the money to pay. We taking everybody's dollars. Even if we don't like you, we still taking your dollars.
Well, but Trey, I don't even think it's on an individual level, right?
Nah,
We're talking about economic systems, right?
true.
Because slavery was designed as a way to create a workforce system of free labor for white male property owners to gain wealth, right?
True.
And that's how a lot of people have sustained wealth and legacies has been from the institutions of slavery. Because you can't just up and one day say, okay, my bad, we gonna stop. Like that doesn't bring equity, right? Because
Uh-uh.
those folks who were created to have that advantage continue to have that advantage generationally.
And it
And
grows
so
exponentially.
we're talking about like systems and structures that continue to perpetuate each other and like just ignoring it doesn't fix it. And so I think that's part of the problem. Like, for example, there's a conversation about like reparations in Tulsa to where you got leaders who are like, it's off the table because they feel like, well, we're going to build these economic development projects and therefore that's going to bring equity to everybody. And that's not how that works.
It's
I was
not.
even
And
having a
it's
conversation. Oh, go ahead.
oh,
Go ahead.
that's not how that works. That's saying we're gonna gentrify your area and call it reparations. Like I ain't stupid. You know what I'm saying? Like that's how sometimes I feel like the shit they say to us is like you are banking on the fact that you didn't educate us. You banking on the
Yeah.
fact that we don't know how this works.
Yeah,
But
especially like for people losing their homes today, right? There are these folks in these we buy homes or
yep.
whatever, taking your home that's probably worth, what, let's say $100,000, buying it from you for 30,000, and then flipping that home and then selling it for $300,000 or turning it into an Airbnb or whatever. And now you got people who are stuck who can't afford to. You get what I'm saying? And so,
And now you done got
um,
this $30,000 check, but now you a renter and you know what I'm saying? Now the rent going up. Like it never
it puts
actually
us further
benefits
behind.
exactly under the
Hmm.
guise that it's gonna
Help us
do
out.
exactly. So okay. Back to you specifically. So let's
Yeah.
backtrack a little bit. So you go to school. What was your major? What did you graduate? What was your what is your degree in?
Yes, so I mentioned I went to Oklahoma City University
Mm-hmm.
as a Clara Looper scholar, and I'll never forget, tying back to our Lawton conversation. I told one of my teachers my senior year that I was going to Oklahoma City University. You know what her response to me was?
What?
Oh, that's an expensive school. That's a comment that would not have been said to one of our white peers. But the thing is like
No.
I didn't come up from a wealthy household, right? So it wasn't expected of me to go to a school like Oklahoma City University. But I
Which
am
is
grateful
ridiculous
for.
though, because
Mhm.
just for clarification, as someone who went to school with you, it's not like when you talk about and when I talk about not being one of the affluent families, one of the rich families that we went to school with, neither one of us was the kids who was wearing the same clothes to school every day. Like we both grew up fine. Like we was comfortable. Like you know what I'm saying? Like, but like paying for college for a kid is just not something within the bound. That's just an American fallacy that because your family is like a middle class family, they'll be able to pay for you to go to college. You know what I'm saying? That's just not true.
Absolutely.
So for
Absolutely.
her to even read that on you as though you presented as a way, you know what I'm saying? Like the way that we presented at school, there would be
Yeah.
no reason for them to even know what level of comfort or middle class we really resided in when we left out of there.
Right.
You know, black people spend more on stuff like that anyway. Like
Right.
these white kids coming in here with these dirty ass shoes on, did you just assuming they got money on because you know what I'm saying? And like we out here with all this money worth of clothes on, whether or not we could afford it or not. You like, yeah, that's an expensive school for one of y'all. Like, oh, good talk.
It's
Was it an
it's
English
it's just
teacher?
it was a math teacher.
It was a math
So
teacher. I was
it was
trying to
a
guess
math
who it
teacher.
was. Anyway.
But so went to OCU, and my scholarship required us to we got to pick whatever majors we wanted to be a part of. That's one thing I love about the scholarship program because
That's
it was really
lovely.
focused on bringing underrepresented students the opportunity to get a quality education, right? And so the requirement was, we had meetings for our scholarship program, and then we had to do a number of community service hours per year. And so
That's good
I was
though.
actually originally a music major at OCU.
Which is not surprising.
Um, so I found out that um, I had nodules on my vocal cords because, like, sometimes my voice would be super raspy. Because, Drab, I'm sure you remember I used to play on the volleyball team. I'm
Yeah.
I was always a talker,
Mm-hmm.
and I was always like yelling and stuff. And so I think over time, those things were just kind of damaging to my vocal cords. And so
Uh,
I had to go through speech therapy. They said, over time, if they look and they're still there, then I would have to have them like surgically removed. I had to stop eating stuff like ketchup because like tomatoes or vocal irritants. And I was just like, I'm not about to live my life like this. Like, as much as I
like
love music, I'm not going to live my life like this. And so I changed my
that's
major
crazy. That is
and
crazy that that is how that happened. That is actually
yeah, yeah.
that's such a
I,
like that's
I still
so
sing
it's
here
so
and there,
random.
but yeah, it is. It's very random. Because I mean, like I was for real singing, y'all. Like I was
Yeah.
all state vocalist in college. I mean, high school and all the things. Like I was really prepared for a career in music. But I took a political science class, and I really enjoyed it. Um, I've always had a lens for justice. I've always had a lens
Yeah.
for using my voice to make a difference. So if I saw something that wasn't right, I was never afraid to speak up. I was always involved in like the student council stuff and all of that. And I loved my government class. I had a government class my senior year because I think, yeah, the senior year we were required to take government. And I liked
Yeah.
it. And so I decided that my major would be political science. And then I I'm sorry, double major in political science and history.
Okay.
And so my original plan was I was going to go to law school. And number one, I took the LSAT and it was not the best score because I thought I'm just not a test taker. But secondly, I had my history professor who was just incredible. I think a lot of my journey has been I've had the right people giving me the right guidance and the right advice at the right time. So I told you about my sister
That is
telling me to take the scholarship, and that's
major.
the reason why I was at OCU, right?
Yeah.
My history professor said, listen, I know what you want to do. Don't go to law school, save that money, get you a master's of public administration degree, find a graduate assistantship to help you pay for it so you can keep money in your pocket and still do the things you want to do. And so I took that advice and I went to OU for my master's of public administration degree, and my concentration was public policy
Okay.
because I loved that change making space. And then I learned more deeply through my graduate studies that policy analysis was the area that I wanted to make the most difference because there's not a lot of people who look like us in the space of
True.
shaping policy and analyzing the impacts of what these decisions have on us and knowing what the data says, right? And
I've always
interpreting what it
felt
means
like
for our
that has to
communities.
be a big part of it that people don't see, which is that cause like, man, I'm all, for me, and it's crazy to say this, I have always felt like one of the biggest barriers to like progress in a lot of instances is the well-meaning white person who just don't know no better. And
That's
it's
it.
like, if you're trying to help a community without anyone from the community to tell you how to administer that help, it doesn't really matter how much you want to do it.
That's exactly it.
You're gonna miss the mark in a lot of different
That's
ways.
exactly it.
Um,
And I mean, and that's the case from even all levels of governance, right?
mhm.
Like, people aren't building policies because they're bad people. They just have a limited frame of reference for
Yeah.
perspective, right? So you're building, if it's all white males in a legislature, then they're building policy based on a white, affluent male perspective, right?
Hmm.
So they're leaving a lot of folks out to context of how things would impact different communities, right? And so I participated in the Summer Policy Institute, that an organization that I later worked for, the Oklahoma Policy Institute,
Yeah.
hosted for college students. And I saw just like these folks from the nonprofit spaces who were focused on specific issues, who were weighing into conversations about homelessness, who were weighing into conversations about the criminal justice system, who were talking about where we put our tax dollars, right?
Yeah.
Because our state budget is a moral document and tells us what we prioritize most, right? And
Straight
so I
up.
was like, I want to be one of those people at the table. And so the director of that program, of that organization, um, just really became like a mentor to me. So even after I finished college, I applied for a fellowship program, and I was selected to work in Arkansas, because that summer I had a chance to do
I
some policy work in Arkansas, and
I
I
was
loved
wondering
it.
how you ended up in Arkansas. I was wondering like
Yeah,
where that ended up being. So you ended up getting selected to do that. So that's something that you
yeah. Well,
okay.
because in grad school I did a program, what was called the Southern Education Leadership Initiative. That's based in Atlanta, and they were picking people in the South because Oklahoma is different things to different people. So
They don't
we
cause
could
yeah, cause they
culturally
swear that
become
we
the
not the
South,
South. They s-
or there's, and actually, you know what? This is a quick sidebar. There's parts of Oklahoma apparently that's considered the Ozarks, right? So
yeah,
like
yeah.
Oklahoma is just such a unique place with so many different cultures and
True.
terrains within it. But that they considered in this cohort that Oklahoma is the South based on many of our educational um, rankings and different
That's
experiences that
wild.
were happening. And so, and so I got
It
picked,
should
and I
not
was
be that
placed.
funny to me that they were like, y'all ain't really that South. Oh, 48 in education? Oh, that sound pretty Southern to me. Like
I mean, but even just like some of the histories in Oklahoma have,
yeah.
some similarities and things. And so they placed me in Arkansas that summer, and I was studying disparities in school facilities.
Okay.
And I had the chance to go to different parts of Arkansas, and I was like, Jesus, be a fence around me, because I had to drive up to the little mountainous parts of like North Arkansas, where
Eee.
like they had Confederate flags hanging different places, and I'm driving by myself I'm like, Lord, please don't let me run out of gas or my car break down or whatever. But
Ooh.
um, but it was really a enlightening experience, because like I believe like when you're looking at information, you have to uh, disaggregate or break down the data to look at what exactly is happening in different communities. There were some shared experiences among rural whites as the rural blacks in in the Arkansas Delta, right? To where these folks, because they don't have the tax base in their communities to be able to raise money for their schools, were using um, facilities that were decades, years old. There was one school building I went to, the roof barely cleared because like it was built like years ago when people weren't that tall. So Dre, like your head may have hit the ceiling.
What?
They still had like the green chalkboards. They had, the watermarks on the ceiling. And then you would go to the suburban schools, right? So there's an area called Conway that I usually compare to being like the Edmond of
Okay.
Arkansas, right?
Yeah.
Because it's right outside of Little Rock. Their high school facility looks like a whole college. Like they
Mm-hmm.
had state of the art classrooms. The classrooms are wide. I mean, there's research that talks about like the aesthetics having an impact on learning, to where they had different walls that were different colors. They had these art studios that looked like professional art studios. They had the equipment in their health rooms with like the state of the art dummies that you can learn how to like draw blood from, or do the
That is
CPR compressions,
in
and
a high school.
in a high school, right?
In
And
a
so there's
high
just no
school.
way that you can say that the kids who are lucky enough to live in Conway are getting the same educational opportunity as the kids who have three people doing seven jobs in their school district, right?
Yeah, there's
And barely
no
have
way.
access to AP classes, right?
It's
And so,
crazy to me that go ahead. Go ahead.
well, and so I just spent my summer writing about it. And then there's a facilities program that they have about funding school facilities that had been underfunded for a long time. And so I created a documentary to tie the pieces, because some of these lawmakers had never been to some of these other communities to
Of
see what
course
was
they
really
haven't.
happening. And so I was able to present that documentary before a joint educational, before their joint education committee at the Arkansas legislature. And I showed the video, and then my director at that time wrote a report to complement. And we were able to get, I think, about $10 million put into that
Let's
facility
go.
program. And so that really demonstrated to me, like, the importance of like analysis and having the information and bringing the information to the table, but like being able to use our voice in this different way to really shape decisions that were happening. And so after I graduated from grad school, I went back to Arkansas for 2 years to be their education policy analyst.
Okay.
So to do more work and build on that.
So, a few things that I kind of like seen in everything you're saying. It's a few things. Number one, it's crazy how you see people who get get like you get marginalized in a way, either by lack of education or by really it's all by lack of education to a degree, because you have, like, you talk about the similarities in these communities that clearly when you drive through the hood in Arkansas, you're not seeing a bunch of Confederate flags and Trump stickers and stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not. And I know the time frame. It wasn't no Trump stuff going on there because it was a little bit before that. But
Yeah.
still, like, that same vibe where it's like, this is what the policies that we advocate for in this community are of a detriment to us in ways that we don't even pay attention to. You know, like when you look at how many states have like that high population of rural white community that don't have like Medicaid expansion, or
Yes.
don't have things that are direct failures of the people who represent them by not providing them access to,
Right.
but they've been successfully given another boogeyman to blame. So they're not even holding. That's what I was trying to say. It's an example of two communities who are not holding people accountable for two different
Yeah.
reasons. One, for
Yeah.
lack of understanding, because I feel like in the black community, we don't know who to hold accountable, which is why every
Because
black
we're
person
structurally
think,
left out.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden did everything that's happened since Joe Biden was president. Anything negative that happened, anything they like, see, Joe Biden did it. It's like, that's a that's a city thing, bro. Like, your mayor
Yeah.
did that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, Joe Biden don't have shit to do with that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Well,
it'll
and
be
dual federalism is complicated, right? Like having all of these different levels of government that do different functions is hard for, hell, the people who study this and do this work for a living to keep up with. So I could only imagine folks who are working multiple jobs, trying to take care of their kids and keep the lights on, um, being able to also follow when this random February school board
because you
election
have to
is, or
self
when,
educate. That's
yeah,
the
yeah,
issue with it is that you have to self educate in
yeah,
order to really know how these structures work. And it's just a burden that the white community doesn't have because the structures are already set up to benefit them. So
Sure.
educated or not, it's pretty much gonna work. Like you have a country where 85% of the people are just kind of hoping it works out. But out of that 85%, the white ones will pretty much be fine if you got a little bit of something and you got all these black and brown people who are still in that same boat of not understanding, not realizing that we don't
Hmm.
have the luxury to be uninformed. And it's not, I never say that to blame the people who are uninformed because it's not our fault. But at the end of the day, it does become our burden.
No, that's true. That's true.
Um,
I mean, and that there, that what you're saying is very valid, especially about like how some people have that privilege of benefiting from something, whether they're engaged or not. Because when you have one group of people who take up a majority of elected offices across the country at nearly all levels of government, those perspectives are reflected in the ways that they make decisions, right?
yeah, 100%.
And then that structurally, you know, pushes out the voices of LGBTQ Americans. It pushes out
Absolutely.
the viewpoints of Black and Brown folks. It pushes out the viewpoints of um, people who may be, you know, immigrants in different ways, or people who are facing whatever the life situation
Yeah,
is, right? And
whatever
so when,
marginalizes you, because there's so many marginalizing factors in America. It's never meant to.
yes,
I always want to make that clear too. I always speak from the lens of being black because it's the thing that I am.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? It's not because I don't know that there are all these other marginalized communities that have this unique
yeah,
experience within America. It's just that it's something I can't speak to. I'm black and I'm the most privileged of the blacks because I'm a black man. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't have all these lenses. I'm a black cis man. Like I don't have any of the other markers except black. And it's
yeah,
crazy that we live in a world like that, but that's something that I try and be mindful of because I never want to make it seem like I think only black people have problems, and I also don't ever want to make it seem like I don't understand that I don't have to eat all those problems the same way that other black people do. Like I have it as easy as a black person could have it. Only thing I could have had more is be rich. I wasn't born rich, but beyond
yeah.
that, like I know that my experience is not.
But even then, there's just so many different like historical traumas and different things that people
Mhm.
face in different communities. And even with, and I appreciate the dialogue and the nuance about privilege because we all have different degrees of privilege, right? But the
Mhm.
reality is when your perspectives are not reflected or represented in different viewpoints, like it does
That's
affect
true.
what happens around you. Like at
Exactly.
the state capitol. So my role currently is I am a lobbyist, right? I'm an advocacy and policy director for our food banks, particularly. So
Hmm.
I'm right now in the area of food insecurity. But even 5 years ago, when I was working with the Oklahoma Policy Institute as their outreach and legislative director, so I've been a lobbyist for I think a little over 5 years now. Um, I was the one, if not only, I'll say, if not only young Black woman lobbyist at the Capitol, right? Because
Not
most
not surprising
times
at all.
the people who are in that building are more fluent, they're former lawmakers, they're white, frankly, because
Hmm.
the pathways in that career field are based on relationships. And who do you typically have relationships with, right? People you have proximity to. And
Hmm.
who do we typically have proximity to? People who look like us. And if
Hmm.
the people who are in that Capitol building look like one group of people, then that's going to be the folks who are likely reflected in things related to government, right? And so that's why,
Hmm.
like, there are a lot of stressful days. There are a lot
Yeah,
of challenges
I'm
I've faced,
sure.
especially from being, the minority in so many different ways at that building. But it matters that they have some, because there was a time actually I was afraid of wearing braids at the Capitol. I was
I
afraid of
believe
getting my
it.
hair
I
twisted
believe it.
because I didn't want to be looked at as an outsider that no one was going to take seriously. I already had people wondering if I was an intern. I had a lawmaker at one time refer to me to a friend as the little black girl, right? And so, like, but
Oh
one
man,
thing that
like
I have, like, grown to be confident in is my ability to do this work and to hustle and strategize in ways to still get the outcomes that I need to get that many people will never understand. Because, like, in fact, there was a time I did a panel, and there was what we call in-house lobbyists and contract lobbyists. So your in-house lobbyists are the folks who work with one organization and they're paid to represent one interest, right? That's what I do.
that's what you do because you work
Um,
for the food bank.
yeah, and
Okay.
the contract lobbyists are the folks who are basically those guns for hire. They
Yeah.
represent whatever issues they're paid to talk to lawmakers about. And often those are the folks who have a lot of power because they have access to monies where they can take lawmakers out to
Money.
dinners, they can give to campaigns and all that kind of stuff. And most times, and I won't say like all in-house lobbyists, but many of us, especially those who, do advocacy work and policy work in the nonprofit space, don't have that luxury, right?
Yeah,
And
y'all
so
just
I
y'all
would
just trying to get it done on the merit that it needs to be done.
I
Is
look
that
at the
and
thing.
I'm only specifying that because I want to be sure that like because I think that that's a distinction that people who see things not being done from the outside don't really understand is that
Mhm.
the people who are advocating for the things that you probably want to see done, the things that you think are like moral imperatives for society, are probably doing them with that as their fuel. The
Right,
people who are advocating for other things got a big ass bag of money.
right.
You know what I'm saying? That they carry into every meeting in one way or another, whether it be a donation, whether it be a where we even having this. I would
Mhm.
imagine that when you want to talk to somebody one on one, you pulling up to their office. You know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah.
you asking them if they could come by the
Mhm.
office or can I meet you
Yep.
here? They talking about, well,
Yep.
where would
Can
you
I
like
tour
to?
you here? Yeah.
Yeah, they taking people out to dinner and we drinking.
They go on to the fundraisers. And I mean, a lot of the work that happens at the Capitol is often outside of those hours because there's a lot of conversations or relationship building and things. So I was in that panel discussion because we were talking to some students and the contract lobbyists just kept trying to like demean me essentially in front of these students. So I finally had to say, like, I got 7 years of experience in this business. I don't need to be lectured on how to do my job. And she was just like, well, 7 years is a long time. And so there's just all these just microaggressions that you constantly have to navigate. Because I mean, I had students just messaging me in that chat box like, we are so sorry, and they were angry for me, and I had to keep my composure because that's what Black women have to do, right? You saw the
Straight up, you have to.
you saw the hearings for Ketanji
Mm-hmm.
uh, Jackson Brown for
Mm-hmm.
the Supreme Court.
I
She
did.
had to keep her composure and withstanding just all kinds of questions that had nothing to do with the qualification. She is overqualified for the job and still had to endure all kinds of,
And
outlandish questioning.
and it's
Right.
the demeanor that you talk about that she had to keep because when you contrast that to Kavanaugh's confirmation and
Mhm.
when women are like, yeah, but he raped me when we was younger. He like turned her red in the face, damn near talking about, yeah, he might as well have been on stand talking about that bitch lying. Like that's how I felt like I was watching him the whole
Get mad
confirmation.
about beer, like, and we
Who
just
don't
don't
have a
have.
few beers? Who
Yeah.
says I'm aggressive? Who say you know what I'm saying?
And we don't have the luxury to respond, even though, like, we can have, because Dre, you said it earlier, and when we first started, you can have all of the knowledge in the world and all of the credentials, and sometimes it still may not be enough, right? And so that's something I had to navigate, especially because it can foster a sense of imposter syndrome inside of you that I had to work through to know that I'm capable of doing these things. I mean, I crafted a strategy and organized a coalition that got a predatory lending bill vetoed by Governor Fallon back in the day, right? I advanced strategy that helped kill legislation that would have cut um, access to Medicaid for a whole lot of families across the state, right? I helped advance legislation that would have like helped our state budget in different ways. You know what I'm saying? And so there's just so many different things I've been able to do in my career, and not because I'm the smartest person or whatever, but I've had to learn how to strategize,
Hmm.
build those relationships, and frankly, grind in this work to be able to reach those outcomes and still
And in a
do good
hostile
work that helps
environment.
people in a hostile
Yeah,
environment.
you're not in
Right.
California. Like it's not like I think that's another reason why I think the work that you do is A so important. It's so important to highlight what you have to go through to get it done. And the fact that you really are up there like in a war with a six shooter. You know, like you got a pistol, you know what I'm saying? And they got tanks up there. It's like
Yeah.
it's the
Or
fact
sometimes a butter
that
knife, right? Like,
yeah, right. I like, and I would an assumption that I have and a question that I'll just ask you is that I would assume that you, is it? Do you find it more difficult to advocate for things that are specifically for Black or Brown communities because you're kind of like the only Black face in the room? Like, is it kind of like, well, of course, you think this is an issue? Like, do you feel like you come across that?
I feel like because of who
Or I
I,
will even just to make the question a little bit more clear. Do you feel like sometimes you may have to frame things in a way, even if your intent may be like kind of flashback to when you're talking about school policy in Arkansas, when you saw those white kids in those conditions, did it ring off to you? This is the way to make this problem a little easier to solve for two communities that mirror each other if I make this one the face.
well, my job is to connect the dots, right?
Okay.
And proximity and relatability helps to connect those dots. Now, with that, I give the caveat that I do not believe in sugarcoating issues, right? I believe that we have to speak truth, but there is a way to speak it in a way that helps people digest the
Yeah. You
information.
got to say it in a way it'll be
So,
received or else it's pointless.
yeah, but we can't not say
Hmm.
that there are disparities that exist between Black and white households,
Yeah.
right? Or Black and Indigenous Black
Yeah.
Indigenous households
Especially in Oklahoma.
versus white
Yeah.
households, right? Like we can't not talk about how um, systemic issues and structural issues over time affect some more than others, right?
Yeah.
We can't, like, I believe in using words, right?
Hmm.
Like, if we're going to talk about, what ways of, like, when we talk about, like, what's happening in communities and policing, like, we can't not talk about, the issues of police violence and police brutality, right? And
Hmm.
so, but I do believe that there are ways that we can frame the issue to help find where there's common ground. So, like, for example, I was mentioning that predatory lending legislation that we were able, that impacts Black and Brown communities more frequently because they often set up shop in our communities,
Yep.
right? And they often prey on people who are facing the hardest times, right? I
Hmm.
was able to work with one of the most conservative lawmakers in the legislature at that time. We worked together to write some op-eds in the paper about the issue. And so he was able to hit some audiences that I wasn't able to touch, right? And
Yeah.
so sometimes it's even about the right coalition building to move messages. And
Yeah.
so,
That's the thing that I think people don't realize what politics is in a lot of cases is not the person who you want. And I know you're not an elected official, you influence elected officials. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right,
you know what I'm saying?
right.
So it is I'm not trying to parallel that. I want to make that clear.
Yeah.
But for all the people who are working in the space, they feel like the people who are advocating for my thing are just supposed to get it done. They're supposed to go up
Yeah.
there and make it happen, but it's like realistically speaking,
It's the people have power.
yeah,
At the end of the day, those folks whose names are on the door care about the people who could get them elected or send them home, right? And so that's where I believe that although I'm there to influence lawmakers, we also have to have that people power, putting that pressure on them and having that level of accountability. I'll bring up the best example, the Julius Jones case. Julius Jones was set to be executed in Oklahoma, right?
for something he
Um,
just didn't do.
right. There's a
Like
lot of
it's
evidence pointing to his innocence,
mm-hmm.
but because of our belief system of justice in this state of when somebody is wronged, having some type of accountability like the death penalty, there's some folks who are bought into just killing him without doing the due diligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were people in Oklahoma City, Julius's family, number one, from day one, but also local activists like rapper JB and business owner, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had my girl Francie, you had Jess Eddie, you had like all of these different, Cece Davis Jones, right? Who was a minister who happened to move to Oklahoma around the right time, felt conviction about this case, and dedicated her time to making sure he doesn't get executed, right? The snowball effect hit to where people across the country were talking about Julius. They applied enough pressure to the governor, right? They appealed to the Pardon and Parole Board, who made the recommendation that his sentence should be commuted, right? And literally to the wire, the governor could have made the decision to allow him to be executed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the people put enough pressure, because originally he was like, that's gonna be it. Like, it seemed like an uphill battle to save his life, and enough people showed up, and that man is still alive today. He's still incarcerated, so there's more work to be done. But he's alive today because of the work people did to show up, right?
So that
and
point
that's
that
something
you
a
making,
lobbyist can't stop.
That is a huge point in two ways. Because you talk about how like it is the power of the people who make all that happen, and there's an inverse that I think doesn't get spoken of in a way that people are comfortable accepting often enough. And what I mean by that is the inverse of that is also the reason why Governor Stitt didn't do it faster or was unwilling to do it or didn't commute it all the way around is because he's aware of the people who he's aware that the people in his circle, the people that he knows that his constituents will view that as a move that like they aren't in line with. It doesn't align with those. So because, and not to, I don't even look at,
and it wasn't
weird.
in line, because in fact there was some polling about where do conservatives stand on this, and allegedly there was a majority, and this was by a conservative pollster who was trying to say that a majority of conservative Oklahomans basically support his execution, that it would be the wrong political decision to do. But there was enough people power to push him to even go against the alleged position of the base, right? And so we cannot underestimate the power that we have to influence decisions.
Yeah, I like that. And I know that we have kept you. These interviews, they go so fast. Like that's the thing I love most about them, especially if you get comfortable and you start talking. Like you look up, you're like, dang, it's really already been an hour. Like, but no, I really, really, really appreciate you coming. I really appreciate you doing this. You have an open invite to come back anytime you want.
Well, I can't wait to come back.
You want. So please be sure to use that. Is there anything that before you get out of here, is there anything that you wanna say?
I'll just say thank you, Dre, for giving me the opportunity just to chat and catch up and talk about some really important things. I am always doing work to connect people to their government, for their government to be responsive to them. So feel free to follow me on Twitter at Bailey M. Perkins. You can add me as a friend on LinkedIn or find me on Facebook or whatever. Let's connect, because I love to plug people into our civic system, right? And because it's up to us to change it. And so, Dre, I appreciate your time and can't wait to come back.
Definitely. I appreciate you coming on. You definitely showed that the conversation was a lot. We appreciate you. As someone, I don't live in Oklahoma anymore. I live in Houston now, but I appreciate the work that you do as a whole, just as somebody who comes from the same community as you both, as in literally come from the same community as you. One of the houses I grew up on is literally right around the corner from where your family house is over there, off Gore or whatever. Yeah, so, and just knowing that, seeing that all the steps you have to go through in order to get this work done, the challenge that you go through, just know that we all here uplifted you through that because we appreciate it. We
Appreciate it.
know that there are days that you wake up and it's like, oh, so
Listen,
thank
my
you.
community keeps me grounded, so thank you for always being a part of my community. So appreciate you.
All,
So,
all right. We will see you next time.
see you next time.
All right. Peace.